Сердце, как хорошо на свете жить. Сердце, как хорошо, что ты такое. Спасибо, сердце, что ты умеешь так lubić.
Skąd pani to wzięła?
Z filmu.
I o czym to jest?
O miłości, no. Serce.
Pawel, I would like to ask you first, what and when was the first idea, how that idea came? What do you remember that of the seed of this film, and when that happened, long time ago, when and what?
It's hard to pin down when exactly it happened, because the story is largely inspired by my parents, who died in 1989 in a situation very similar to the way our heroes die in the film. And they left this huge vacuum in my life. You know, I was the only child, and I realized that their relationship, their story was like the best, the most dramatic and bizarre and complicated story I've ever come across. The way they met just after the war, when she was a teenager and he was 10 years older. The way they got married, you know, she ran away from home and to the ballet, and then she was kind of hot-headed girl, and then the way they fought, you know, because they're both kind of attractive, strong individuals. The way they separated, betrayed each other, got together. It was a fantastically complicated story, which overshadowed my whole life, you know, in a technical way, but also as a main narrative. It was like the biggest love story I came across right in front of me. Because in the end, you know, with all the toing and froing and marrying other people, leaving the country, remarrying, reseparating again, and then after 40 years of all that, dying together, that became like a matrix of all love stories for me. I lived with that for a while, and 10 years after they died, I started thinking maybe one should kind of tell it somehow. Of course, it was too complicated to tell it literally what happened. It was just such a mess. It would make no sense whatsoever on screen. So I attempted to write it up and then put it aside. Oh, that's an impossible story to tell. And then I wrote it again. This must have been 2005 or something. I had a first serious attempt to write it. And then I thought, who's going to act them anyway, you know, these kind of characters. So it was after I finished Ida, I realized that now I have the tools to tell it somehow, because I've developed this synthetic way of storytelling. Also, I was able to abstract the real story a little bit and just not think in terms of it's really them. I just found equivalent characters. And then I decided to just add element of music, you know, so there's like the holy ghost of the whole story is the music, you know, which in my parents' story wasn't the case. I mean, she was a ballerina, but he was a doctor. So the music kind of helped me to move it somewhere else. And this decision to tell it in tableaus, you know, in just chunks, you know, not to explain how we get from A to B, but we just get from A to C, and we don't bother about the B, and hopefully the audience will kind of fill in the gaps. So the success of Ida, I don't mean just popular success, but in my own head, you know, I thought Ida was a kind of interesting way of elliptic storytelling that seemed to work. That encouraged me to go for a totally elliptic, stripped-down version of this very complicated, dramatic story. And again, I wasn't sure it would work, but it felt like I had a method, and it turned out to have worked.
You went too far. Let me go back a little bit.
Okay, I was like, all right.
From the beginning.
Good.
No, it's fascinating what you're saying, because I was in awe, and it's one of those films that it's actually that word of falling in love.
Yeah.
You have to fall. It's not rising in love. Or no, we call it falling in love. This is fall down in love. And I just want to ask you something that I thought about when you told me about the personal story of your parents. How old were you when your parents passed away?
31, I think.
31. And who, as an only child, who you were most close to, who you lived with, when you were a kid, or when they separate, you stay with your mom, you stay with your dad?
There were periods where, I mean, even when they were fighting, they all stayed in one flat because in communist Poland, accommodation was But I remember emotionally, I was for periods of time when I was really young. Emotionally, I was with my mother, and there periods of time was with my father. So early on, I realized that there are different narratives that seem to make sense when you're inside them, and then you can see everything from the other side, which is quite a lesson.
And I'm asking you this because, in a way, I think when you tell such a personal story from the people that brought you to this planet Earth, in a way, it's easy to take sides, or the temptation to take sides depending on the story of your emotional, I will say, testimony. But it seems to me that you did not take sides. So, I mean, there's no point of view in the story of her, of him, in a way. For me, it's obviously an observation of these two people. That was a conscious decision about it? Or?
I think I'm programmed like that, that motto, of Renoir's, everyone has their reasons. I kind of seem to have drunk it with my mother's milk, I tend to see the world like that. Of course, some exceptions. And also that childhood, where once you're with your dad and he's great, and you can totally kind of see his perspective on things, and then you're with your mother, and then father seems to be incomprehensible, and the mother makes much more sense. That was a kind of training, I suppose. But you're right, but I see them as a double act. Also, I think in films in general, what makes sense to me are relationships. It's people entangled in some complicated way. And that's a classical case of that.
The things that you decide not to tell, the things that you took out from this super complicated, long period story, I think that's a very strong decision, a very precise decision. And you were explaining how you start probably 10 years after they pass away to think about it. But it took you time to arrive to how to execute the idea. One thing is the idea to do it, the other thing is how I do it. What is your process in that sense?
Yeah, it was definitely there was more, I threw more into the pot, of course, and then it was a question of what really is necessary, what will play, will it add anything? So when Zula goes to, she actually ends up in the West by marrying an Italian, some cut glass merchant, and it just comes out in dialogue, But at some point I wrote a scene where Victor goes to see her in Italy and sees her with this dodgy Italian character. But I then realized we don't want to introduce any more characters, What seems to work is just this double act plus the third character, Kaczmarek, who crops up at different times. So yes, of course, I tried things out, but they quickly die a death, I mean, the film at some point, while you're writing it, but also when you're shooting it, it tells you what to do, once you've found the groove. So, of course, there was a bit more, even as we started filming, there were more scenes written, but because I was cutting as I went along, I kind of evaluated, is it worth having them at all? There's a scene where Kaczmarek explains to Zula why she shouldn't be with Victor, that he's of a different ilk, different material, you don't belong together. And it was quite a good scene, and Boris, who played Kaczmarek, was very keen on it, but I kind of realized it's totally not necessary. It's all kind of in the images there, in the body language, in the way it plays in the other scenes. So I cut that scene even before we shot it, and I invented some other scene in its place.
And you took a lot of freedoms to obviously be inspired in your parents' love story, but at the same time you were obviously taking notes, fictionalized many things.
I forgot that it's about them, At some point that was the only way to do it, just this couple has a kind of logic of their own, the starting point is one thing, but...
And then you take the chance to liberate yourself from the real story.
Absolutely, and then you just enjoy the kind of more invention, and go with the flow and kind of feel your way around the actors, Of course, they bring a certain reality to the thing as well and liberate you from the image you had of the original characters.
Everything is founded in these two incredible actors. I mean, I think the cast is such an incredible job you did. I told you that the actor looks like you, in a way.
So people say, yeah.
A handsome guy. And I don't know, I didn't know your parents, but I'm imagining that they were maybe resembled, they were maybe good looking.
There was some analogy, she was
and she's amazing. Did you have them in mind when you were writing, or you did a long cast? How that happened?
I had her in mind because I'd worked with Joanna before, and I knew she had qualities for the part. I met her like 10 years before for a film that never happened. And I was charmed completely, It was a fantastic audition for a non-existent film, These are the best. But I thought, I want to work with her again, and, I'd worked with her. She was in Ida as well. But 10 years down the line, I've got this part which is very close to her. I mean, she didn't fully have all the... I didn't know whether she'd have the whole range, because there's the kind of femme fatale, Lauren Bacall, sardonic kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's not what Joanna is known for and has done before, So there was a good grounding, and she can sing, which is a huge plus. And she's charming and she's spontaneous and she's kind of from the right kind of world. But then it was a long process to get all the different nuances of acting and...
Did you rehearse?
We rehearsed, we talked a lot. It was like half a year of, prep, but not exactly rehearsing, just kind of fooling around, because
Blocking some scenes and improvising.
Improvising a bit and just making them enter the world. And while it was happening, I was just kind of rethinking the script all the time. And this is my process. I always kind of just... I become much more inventive in action rather than at my laptop, like just,
Yeah, you have
when
to
you find
touch
the location, you see the people, and then it's what they bring, but also just the very fact of doing it opens all sorts of, channels.
So do you do exercise like, do you get together in a room, you plant some maybe conflict and you start improvising some emotions, and that in a way feed you with some possibilities that they discover or you discover while...
Or it shows a dead-end scene, that has no point.
That doesn't...
And very often we just sit down and read the latest version of the text, just to hear it, how does it flow. Sometimes you just go in the park and just try out some physical things, but it's very loose, very unscientific.
But before you go to shoot the film, you have more the script is set in a stone, or you still, when you are shooting, you are still improvising?
I'm still not improvising, but...
Because it's very precise. The film is very few dialogue, and the dialogue is very precise. So that's why I'm asking.
But even then it changed. But it's not exactly improvisation, it's more like sculpting, try a bit of this, try a bit of that. I do quite a lot of takes because I try to get everything done in one shot. There's a master shot. So the image and the performances come together. So to get that right, with the lighting, with the framing, with the background action and all actors kind of firing, it's quite a tightrope act, You can't cut your way out of trouble, So I don't move the lights around. I really set up the shot, we work the shot, and then we chisel within it, just adding stuff and then taking things away. And then try this way, try that way. Something that seemed okay in one of our workshops suddenly has gone dead, so let's kind of think again. And it's quite unnerving for actors to start with, but after weeks of this, they start being part of the process and feeling that they're part of a larger whole of the image. And if I take their lines away or even shout something from behind the camera to do, which also sometimes happens, they don't panic. We become like one, organism.
But you're saying, it's a lot of, sculpting, looking into who these people are, for them, for you. And what I found, that in a way, I shared this with you because there's a lot of discussion about that suddenly by doing this deep kind of exploration, you can lose naturality and all that. Yeah. And I found myself with the actors too, that once they know and they rehearse and they suddenly own the characters. And now they are, even when everything is absolutely very technically, very well studied and precise, it's very natural because they are not thinking. It's almost like they don't think about it.
Yeah.
And that looks incredibly natural, even when it's so artificial. Is that
absolutely? And sometimes, to achieve the feeling that they're real in it, that it's happening for the first time, and everything's kind of accidental, seemingly, you achieve that in take 35. To achieve this feeling of spontaneity, you might have to work it. So it's all about the interaction of control and freedom, no? Like
and discovery.
The alpha and omega.
After Ida, you decide to make another black and white film.
It wasn't that I wanted to make a black and white film. In fact, it was kind of tempting not to make one, just to not to repeat oneself. But the film, I couldn't imagine it. I did think of with my DP, we kind of fooled around with other possibilities. Now, what if we did it in a kind of Soviet-type Technicolor, this kind of saturated greens and reds and a bit washed out. But that would have felt very contrived. unlike in Ida, I wanted the black and white to be much more juicy, contrasty. You know, like there's much more to it. You know, in Ida, it's not. It doesn't have that much contrast. Also, it's a bit flatter. You know, and it's got this kind of very eccentric framing with a lot of air above the heads.
Yes.
Whereas here, again, there's air
Still
above the
you
heads,
have
but it's usually because the camera is higher and there's more stuff happening in the background, so we can build much more.
And there's some
in depth.
movement too, no?
And there is movement
in
too,
the
because
music.
you know, I mean, there's so much more energy here. And then the heroine, unlike in Ida, is a contemplative nun. You know, here we have a woman with a lot of energy, so she gets, you know, she deserves the camera.
And I love that because it's stunning. The visual is as stunning as Ida, but at the same time, the decisions of the camera, how the camera and the frame helps to tell the story with that precision, and all what is left out.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful decision. What about you?
With the DP, we're like symbiotic, you know. I mean, we started working on Ida. He was a debutant on Ida. He'd never shot a film in his life. So on Ida, we developed this great kind of rapport, you know. He's very young, very open, and as chaotic as me, you know, so you can imagine the chaos on the set.
So you speak the same language without
exactly,
words.
Exactly, like, absolutely. But he didn't have this kind of attitude, oh, I'm the DP, I'm gonna, you know.
It's a
tell you how
collaboration.
to. It's a total
It's a real
collaboration.
collaboration.
And very open, and very closely connected to the production designers, the couple, you know, we'd work with. So we became like a gang, you know. I mean, we spent a lot of time together, just kind of fantasizing things, you know, and looking for great locations and, you know, doing photo montages of stuff, you know. So it was just a really close-knit team effort, and everybody was taking part. You know, the costume designer, everyone was kind of feeling part of the same process.
You start with these two guys in this, you know, rehearsals for this music propaganda that they are trapped in the post-war Polish, and they meet there. And I think music and the relation, and obviously your politic commentary of the period of time, are completely intertwined. That came as you were writing the script, or always you thought about this kind of combination of all these things that are there?
I always try to mesh things together so they're all function of each other, so nothing is like intentionally foregrounded, you know. So I would never make a film trying to explain history, because it's impossible. But I like making films about characters who are rich emotionally and entangled in an interesting way, but in historical conditions, you know, who are formed by history or deformed by history. So when you can tell history by just being very precise about the emotions, and the history is always kind of there, the history becomes much stronger, you know. So suddenly you really feel what it felt like to live in Stalinist times. And the music, you know, once I decided that musicians, then it was a paradise, you know, because I always love music. I've got like a back catalogue of stuff that I want to use in every film, you know. So then the music became like this other character, you know. And I went around folk festivals in Poland, you know, like looking for performers, for tunes. And the guys you see at the beginning, they're all kind of found at different festivals around Poland.
Fantastic.
But, you know, chosen not exactly for music, but for the whole thing, you know. And then, you know, then that music became the kind of state folklore, but I chose really beautiful songs, and I had...
And you end up in jazz, in the parties.
And then the jazz, you know, I had this wonderful Marcin Masecki, who I wanted to cast as a lead at some point, you know, but he wasn't much of an actor. But he turned out to be brilliant at doing jazz adaptations of these folk songs, you know. So these 3 adaptations are by this brilliant guy. And then we end up with a cheesy pop, a Mexican song, by the way, Bayobongo or something at the end. But we catch up with Bach at the end, so it's all good in the end.
But is the blood and the energy and the rhythm of the film dictated by this music, which obviously it's part of the character stories, which is part of the period that you understand this is 15 years about the relation. And honestly, it's striking when suddenly there's a little cut and suddenly you are maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years later and you don't explain nothing. I love that there's the classic 1960s.
Yeah.
And suddenly by a dialogue you said, oh, wait a minute, she's already pregnant, or, you know, they have been separated for...
Yeah. But dialogue and the type of music and the type of clothes, you know, I mean, audience can fill in a lot.
But I love it that you trust in your audience, and it's clear, and it's brave, and it's smart. And so the elliptical moves that you made are so precise The film is what, 90 minutes, right?
No,
So, I mean, it's
83 and a half plus long credits.
so you said 15
Yeah.
years in 83 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's an exercise of all the things that you did not told were exactly the master synthesis.
But I
of
had
something.
good elements to play with, you know, like, I mean, I identified scenes which were not boring, which is like, you know, I just went straight for like really rich scenes. Not that there's a lot of action, but there's a lot of tension in them. And a lot of, you know, the music helps, you know, because, you know, you cut to Paris and it's bebop, you know, and it's actually, some people recognize it's the folk song that you heard at the very beginning with this woman and accordion, and suddenly it's a bebop number in Paris. And all the time the music is like, it tells you where we are, when we are, emotionally, but also historically. You know, I remember that scene, we're kind of trying to come up with this kind of seduction scene at the
piano.
at the beginning, at the piano, you know. So I thought, how do we bring them together without the kind of obvious stuff, you know? So it's like da 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 da, and then from that it suddenly becomes "I love you, Porgy," which of course he would know, but she would have never heard it because Gershwin was banned, and you know, Western music was banned in Poland. But he, you know, he was aware, he'd been abroad. So suddenly coming up with a little tune, you know, it tells a big story behind, you know, where they come from, you know, and then it also gives you that just kind of technical scene where, a concrete scene where she intuits how the song might go, and when she intuits that, you know, they have some kind of electricity.
Was the moment that you said these guys will be musicians that it enlightened the whole? It was a big.
It became like a good like a glue for the film in a way, because the film is so fragmentary. So the music is always there, kind of keeping it together, especially as same tunes keep cropping up. But it's also something they have in common, you know. So I don't have to kind of labor the relationship too much. It's always kind of there, you know. And in Paris, when she has to sing the Polish folk song in French, lyrics written by his ex-lover, you know, that has already so many implications, you know, and there's just so much left unsaid in that. So the music is always a kind of great tool to suggest stuff.
Dwa serduszka, cztery oczy. Oj, oj, oj.
Being the music so important, the real music that is played during the scenes of the time of these characters, but then the composer, how was the work with him?
I mean, it wasn't a composer, you know. Marcin, he adapted the folk songs to jazz, you know, the bebop number and this lovely version of Dwa serduszka, cztery oczy, the main song. And then he lent me his hands for the close shots on the keys. And he also spent time with Tomasz, the lead actor, showing him the ropes, you know, how to behave, the posture. But also he learned a few tunes on the piano. He taught him Debussy's Clair de Lune, you know, strangely, the first 30 seconds, which we never used in the film. With the folk musicians, I just kind of found them and, you know, and asked them to play certain songs, which I knew would appear later in the film. So it was a kind of like a lot of people were involved in the music.
Is there some Polish directors that influence you? You know, Kieślowski or Bagda, or I mean, is there some Polish?
No, it's more like international, you know, the usual suspects. You know,
The
like,
usual suspects.
Well, also, I mean, some Vaida films I absolutely adore, you know, Ashes and Diamonds and Canal and stuff. But I kind of grew up on the Czech directors of the Czech New Wave, you know, Miloš Forman, love Blonde in Love, I love that film.
God, that film is one of my favorite films.
Then, of course, the Godard, the early Godard, especially Vivre sa vie was one of my favorite films, you know, so...
But you were not very attached to the Polish culture.
No, I was aware of it.
Because it was a good time.
It was very good. Some of them I love, but when people say it's like Polish film school, you know, there's a kind of term.
Exactly. And Kieślowski was a huge rock star in the world at that time.
Yeah, and I liked and respected him, and some of his films I really liked. And his transition from documentary to fiction, a film called Personnel, I was really influential. You know, that was a great moment of discovery. But cinema is a world phenomenon, so, you know, it's a fatherland in itself, no? So, of course, Bresson at some point, you know, Terrence Malick's early films, Scorsese's, the whole kind of independent American cinema, all that is there somewhere,
I think there's a lot of philosophy. You study philosophy.
Yeah, but
And
but not seriously. I love it.
Well,
kind
but
of-
I think there's something about these melting pots and the poetic way, in a way that you frame things that breathe with naturality without that plot-driven thing, and allow people to contemplate something that is telling them something, but you are not pushing the things. How easy was the editing of the film, based that you were kind of very precise and you were doing like shots that were kind of masters? If it took you long time
Not
to edit
at all,
the film?
because I was editing as I went along. So every day I looked at the rushes, and there was no coverage. There was just like this master thing plus maybe another shot. But we had 5-day weeks, so on the 6th day I rested. On the 7th day I was editing. But editing meant just putting these things side by side, occasionally deciding that this is not necessary and just kicking it out. The rhythm of cutting was pretty kind of easy. I wanted a little bit syncopation, so I kind of did, kind of cut slightly at unexpected moments here and there. But that helped me, building the film. That also helped me forget the script and living the film.
Yes.
Changing the subject a little bit, and writing new scenes instead of scenes that were still to be shot.
Because you have the ability to be edited and be taken
Because
decisions.
I see that actually, all this is clear. Why we don't need that scene later, But what we could do is a completely different scene. And I had a very good producer group.
The same
two
of Ida.
producers who were great, Ida and Tanya Segachian, who did My Summer of Love.
So they survive you.
So they survived, but they kind of knew that okay, we just have to go with that's how he works. When we finished shooting, the film was practically finished, but then the whole kind of green screen nightmare started, because of course we're shooting in the 50s and there's like none of that stuff really existed. So, that took like half a year just
The visual effects to get it right.
Yeah, the passage in Berlin, when he crosses to the west, all the stuff in Paris. In Paris we shot in Łódź, in Poland, apart from a few exteriors. But so everything is behind the windows, everything was all green screens. It's such a nightmare, I've never done it. I'm a documentarist, for God's sake. I was learning new tricks.
Yeah, and the beauty is that people doesn't know that, right?
Probably somebody who spotted some dodgy bits, but hopefully they didn't.
So it took that much
It was
more
like
than-
half a year, just trying to get that stuff right, and it was just so frustrating. It was so boring, working on these little.
So you should, which cities you shot the film?
With the green screens?
No, well, the whole film was shot in how many cities you shot?
Oh God, it was all over the place. In Poland, there was like 10 locations. Partly because there were the locations I really wanted, but also because the regional funds, and the film was, not very.
What is that location? The when they go at the end, that kind of empty
the church.
Where is that?
That's in southeastern Poland. It's an Ukrainian Orthodox church where nobody goes anymore. Clearly. I was looking for churches for a long time with my production designers, and in the script I wrote something like Wemko Church, Ruthenian church. We looked at Ruthenian churches; they were not right. They were all wooden and dark and didn't photograph well. So I went on the internet and then found this one on the internet among hundreds of other pictures. Because we wanted something much more Caspar David Friedrich, something much more sublime,
It's very
And then we
Tarkovskian.
Well,
that
inevitably,
church is like,
yeah.
it has that kind of emptiness and hope that is floating.
But it was like looking for locations was half a year. It was at least.
So and then Paris.
And then we had 4 days in Paris because it was too expensive to shoot more. Split down the coast in Croatia, and 10 locations in Poland.
And how many days of shooting was?
The shooting days like 55 or 57, but over a period of 6 months. So these breaks for like rewriting, recutting, and just shaping the film. And torturing the actors a bit more, like trying new things out.
You leave out of Poland many years, and then you return and you did Ida. How this return to your country has been for you? So this has helped you to in a way look back to yourself and your story? Do you think that the geographical move that you did from UK has helped develop all these two films that you have done?
I think it wasn't just
or
that.
It was the other way.
It was more than that. I reached a certain point in life, where a certain chapter was finished, You know, my kids were already out of my hair, and suddenly I was like, so where am I now? You know, and I looked at my films, and I got impatient with cinema. You know, so I thought, okay, I'm going to make something very simple about stuff that's been on my mind for a long time, and in landscapes which I remember, you know, which I kind of ignored in all my filmography, not even documentaries. You know, this. So I went back and I totally reconnected with these landscapes, but also I achieved a certain calm in life, you know.
And maybe the maturity to see them like, no, you have that
I think
perspective.
that was it, like, just something about cinema and about image making. And Ida was like a family album in some way, you know, it was just pictures, you know, pictures and landscapes, faces which, you know, were from the past. And also the feeling that I'm not making a commercial film, you know, and with Ida, I really thought that nobody watched this film, you know, it was like a very liberating feeling. So the return to Poland and actually finding a form which is very much where I'm now, it all came together.
Watching your documentaries and how you observe reality, where you put the characters and the subtleties that you end up editing in your documentaries that in a way possess the same kind of sense of humor, because I think you have a great sense of humor personally, and in your films I captured that kind of sense of humor you have, even when the scenes can be intense or deep. But even in your documentaries, they possess kind of the natural observation you have about it. And I think the way you observe your characters in your fictional films, and more in these ones, are exactly the same. You are just observing human behavior with no judgment. And with and then you edit just right, just to leave the frame with no intervention.
Yeah.
But I think your documentary school helped you a lot to do this, right? Am I right?
Probably in this elliptic storytelling
Exactly,
a bit,
exactly.
and not being too
controlling,
too ploddingly narrative, you know, just like cut from this to this, and just make sure that each element is like strong visually and acoustically, and also just the main drive behind what I do is a love for certain landscapes, especially historical landscapes. You know that, I mean, without explaining history, but you kind of you know what happened here. It's all implied, and for certain faces and situations in certain light. So in a way, my last films kind of return to the documentary origins, especially since they're both in historical landscapes.
Exactly,
you know?
And I found that fascinating. And they are, even when they have the pace you have in your films, the rhythm, which I always said rhythm is God, because without that, the rhythm in Ida and the rhythm in obviously in Cold War, it's such a provocative in the times we are living now, of the streamlined movies that television demands so much action, so much plot, so much narrative attached to people be surprised every 10 minutes or every 3 minutes, because if not, they will go to have a sandwich in the refrigerator or something. So I think the fact that you step away with a lot of tension with that, these two films are in a way very provocative, and they are very, very, in a way, avant-garde, because all the TV is full of completely the contrary, you know?
Well, and cinema too. I mean, Ida was a kind of fuck you to cinema.
Exactly.
You know, I was thinking, I'm just making a photographic film, but literally, it was like I'm bored with all the tricks of cinema. Like, I like films that happen in people's heads, you know. So you give them a certain shots, certain, you know, scenes, sounds, and they have to imagine the rest. Of course, you know, most of the audiences don't want to go there, you know, so they leave the cinema possibly. But those who stay and who you kind of you tune into your film, they remember the film in a completely different way, you know. They really remember because they had to fill in, they had to kind of go into their own imagination, their own memories, their own knowledge of life, their own experience, and it's a much more intense thing.
Where are you now? I mean, are you planning to do a trilogy of black and white films, another Polish film? Where are you now in this moment in your life, living now back in Poland with these two amazing, powerful two films? Where are you?
You know, what trilogy is like, it sounds like a marketing device more than anything. But,
black and white trilogy.
Black and white trilogy, yeah, but no, I mean, I've got a few scripts that I kind of generated and written over a period, but this film I put so much into it, it's left a big void, you know? So I'm feeling, God,
You're exhausted.
I'm exhausted, but also I need to, the next film has to be about something again. So I look at my previous scripts and think, okay, I'm somewhere else now. You know?
A thriller.
But you know that, yeah, absolutely, a thriller, comedy, romantic comedy. But you know the feeling, you know, after each film you're a different person.
Yes.
You come out and the stuff you thought you were kind of excited before no longer has the sex appeal.
Yeah, I took 2, 3, 4 years to make a film, and people say, there's people that do 1 a year, but I can't, I'm not prolific. And I said, I had to leave to have something to say and get some strength and have hungry. You know, I think maybe you will have time to rest a little bit, and then when you start.
I think not making films is quite a skill too, you know.
Absolutely. No, and if you like your life, then maybe to make a film is obviously an effort. There's people, if you are escaping from life, it's better to do films, which is great.
Yeah, I don't need to be on the set. I mean, the way I work is just so bloody nightmarish, and you know, I don't sleep for. Well, so you probably have the same. It's a nightmare on the set.
But you are taking now the time, basically.
I'm writing a couple of things, you know.
But you will be interested back in Poland, or you can now go out?
I think I have unfinished business in Poland, yeah. So I've got
a contemporary film in Poland?
Not so contemporary, but not so far back either. You know.
There's things happening in your country that maybe were to be explored, honestly.
Well, yeah, and it's like there's a certain mood now. There's electricity in the air in Poland, which actually, I don't want to make a film about that, but it does stimulate you to stick to your guns and keep making films there.
Fantastic. Well, it has been a pleasure. I really, really love this film. I think it's going to be, and it's a classic now already, and when I saw it, I couldn't believe that you have achieved such a poetic and powerful and beautiful, so personal story, and at the same time so universal a story. You know, it's heartbreaking, and it's an incredible cinematic achievement. I'm very happy to be doing this talk to you. Now I know your secrets. So thank you, Pawel.
Good. Thank you very much. Cabrón.
Cabrón.
Тебе не хочется покоя, сердце, как хорошо на свете жить.